The smell of smoke hit me before I saw it. I came out of my garage, wrench still in hand, expecting to check the oil in my truck. Instead, I was greeted by a plume of black smoke rising behind my shed and the unmistakable sound of crackling flames. My heart stopped. "No, no, no," I muttered, breaking into a sprint across the backyard. My chicken coop my hand built, 4 months of weekends chicken coop was on fire. The hens inside were clucking in a frenzy, flapping against the wire walls. I grabbed the garden hose and blasted the flames, but it was already too late. The coop was half charred and collapsing, the roof caving in like a paper bag in the rain. I managed to get the girls out, coughing through the smoke, and herded them into a makeshift pen by the fence. I stood there, soaked in sweat and ash, staring in disbelief as the last of my coop sizzled into black ruin. That's when I saw her, Marla Zanders. 50-something, bleach-blonde bob, pink tracksuit, clipboard in one hand and phone in the other. She was standing just beyond the hedge, on the HOA-maintained sidewalk, watching like she was surveying a garden gnome collection. I stormed toward her, fists clenched. "Did you call the fire department?" I asked, barely containing myself. She tilted her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. "It's not my responsibility to manage your livestock issues, Mr. Nolan. My coop just burned down. You're standing here like you're waiting for applause." Her lips curled into a smug little half-smile. "You were warned. Chickens are not allowed under HOA Code 3.2, subsection B. You received 3 notices. I built that coop before you changed that rule. I've got timestamps, permits, and emails. The city said I was clear." "City laws are one thing," she said, waving her hand like she was swatting a fly. "HOA regulations are another. And you've been in violation for months. The board voted. We decided it had to be removed." "Removed?" I stepped closer. "Did you set this fire?" Marla didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. She just adjusted her sunglasses, turned on her heel, and walked away like she hadn't just potentially committed arson. I stood there in shock, the garden hose still dripping in my hand. My name's Trenton Nolan. 46, mechanic, divorced. And the last man on earth you want to tick off by torching his hard work, especially not over a bunch of backyard hens. The next morning, I filed a report with the fire department. They found traces of lighter fluid near the coop's base and ruled it as suspected arson. I handed over my security footage, which clearly showed a woman in a pink tracksuit slipping through the side gate 15 minutes before the fire started. No face, but the body language. Dead giveaway. Then I took that same footage to the police. And guess what? They said it wasn't conclusive enough to press charges. HOA members had legal access to the neighborhood's shared paths, and unless I had direct footage of Marla lighting the match, their hands were tied. So I did what any self-respecting man with a grudge and a toolbox would do. I rebuilt the coop, but this time I went big. I took vacation time from the shop, hauled in lumber from my buddy's mill. I designed it like a fortress, elevated, insulated with a walk-in hatch, solar lights, and reinforced mesh. I even added a little weather vane on top shaped like a chicken flipping the bird. Neighbors started stopping by just to watch the progress. "Trent, you building a chicken palace?" asked old Mr. Cranston from down the street. I wiped sweat from my brow and grinned. "Nope. I'm building an HOA-proof bunker. And here's the kicker: I filed every permit with the city. Every nail, every board, every inch was by the book. The coop sat 2 inches outside the HOA's jurisdiction line, thanks to a property survey I got done the week before. It was technically on a sliver of land that had been misfiled during the last HOA map update, which meant it was mine. Free and clear. Marla showed up 3 days later. She didn't knock. She just came marching across my lawn like she owned the place, lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing at the coop. I didn't even look up. "Looks like a chicken coop to me. You are in direct violation of HOA protocol. Nope." I tossed her a copy of the property survey. "This is outside your jurisdiction. You changed the rules after I built the first one, which was grandfathered in. And now, I'm not even in your sandbox." Her eyes scanned the paper. I could see her jaw working, trying to find a crack in the logic. "This isn't over, Mr. Nolan. You're provoking the board." "Good. Maybe they'll finally do their jobs." She stormed off, again. But I wasn't done. I sent her an invoice, a real one. Stamped and itemized: cost of lumber, construction, hen replacement, labor, permits. I billed her for $10,000. Next to the total, I wrote, "For the unlawful destruction of personal property and emotional distress caused by the willful, malicious actions of the HOA board, namely one Marla Zanders." She didn't respond, but the other board members sure did. 2 days later, I got a visit from Jeremy, the HOA treasurer. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Trent, man, look, we didn't vote to burn your coop. We didn't even know Marla was gonna do anything." "But you knew she was escalating," I said. "You let her harass me for months." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, and now half the neighborhood's turning against us. Your coop's got better insulation than most of the houses on this street. People love it." I tilted my head. "Maybe it's time for a new board." He didn't argue. And neither did the neighbors, because the next week I found a flyer in my mailbox. "Community vote to restructure HOA board Saturday at noon." Guess who was running for president? Me. The lawn chairs started showing up first. One by one, neighbors dragged them onto my front yard the morning of the vote. Old folding ones with frayed straps, a few camping chairs with cup holders, even a hammock strung between my oak and the stop sign. By 10 o'clock, it looked like a tailgate party before a small town football game. Kids ran around with popsicles, dogs wrestled in the grass, and someone fired up a propane griddle on the sidewalk and started flipping pancakes. I stood on my porch in a clean work shirt and jeans, watching the crowd swell. I hadn't asked anyone to come, but they came anyway. Word travels fast when you rebuild a coop more impressive than most garages and invoice the HOA president for burning the first one down. Jeremy arrived with the ballot box under one arm and a clipboard in the other. He looked like a man walking into his own intervention. Behind him trudged 2 other board members, Tracy and Ahmed, both trying to avoid eye contact with me. Marla was nowhere in sight. When Jeremy reached the porch, he cleared his throat. "Trent, we've got the ballots. Community turnout's bigger than expected. Almost every household's participating." "You surprised?" I asked, crossing my arms. He exhaled through his nose. "Honestly, no, she's made a lot of enemies." Tracy stepped forward, brushing a blonde curl behind her ear. "Look, we didn't back her, not on the fire, not on the harassment. We thought she was just sending letters, not. Whatever this was, you stuck around long enough to let her run wild," I said. "Now you're here for cleanup." Ahmed looked at the ground. "That's fair." The vote took less than an hour. People lined up in front of the folding table Jeremy set up, dropped their slips into the box, and then wandered back to chat and eat pancakes. It felt more like a block party than a coup. But make no mistake, this was a reckoning. When the counting finished, Jeremy walked back to the porch and handed over the tally sheet. "You got 73% of the vote," he said, his voice low. "It's yours." I took the sheet and glanced down at the numbers. "What about Marla?" 6 votes, he said. "And one of those was probably her cat." I didn't smile. I nodded and turned to the crowd. "All right, folks," I called out. "We're gonna do things a little differently from now on. No more secret fines, no more rule changes without notice, and definitely no more chicken arson." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but I kept my tone even. "We're gonna rebuild this HOA into something that serves the neighborhood, not micromanages it. Fair rules, transparency. And no more power trips." People clapped, some cheered, and I stepped down off the porch, but I wasn't done yet. I had a visit to make. Later that afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse. I wasn't filing a complaint with the HOA anymore. I was filing criminal charges: arson, trespassing, destruction of property. The fire marshal's report had been finalized that morning. It confirmed accelerants had been used and matched the chemical composition of the lighter fluid Marla had stored in the HOA's shared maintenance shed, one that only board members had keys to. That was all the probable cause I needed. The clerk accepted my paperwork, stamped it, and sent it up the chain. By the end of the week, detectives had already paid Marla a visit. I knew they had when her car vanished from her driveway and didn't come back. The pink lawn flamingos in front of her house wilted in the sun without anyone to reposition them, and her hedges grew wild. No movement inside, curtains drawn tight. Then the news broke. Local paper ran a headline: HOA president under investigation for alleged arson in backyard dispute. The article didn't use her full name, but everyone knew. The details were too specific. My name was in there too, along with a photo of the new Coop and a quote from me about defending the rights of residents from overreach and intimidation. I didn't want the attention, but I wasn't going to hide either. A week later, a black sedan rolled up to my curb. Out stepped a woman in slacks and a blazer, hair pulled back tight, not sweating despite the heat. "Mr. Nolan?" she asked, flipping open a badge. "Detective Lauren Vickers. I'm the lead on the Zanders case." We shook hands. "I've got a few questions," she said. "Mind if we talk inside?" I led her into my kitchen and poured some iced tea. She didn't touch it. "We've got footage of Miss Zanders purchasing accelerant from a hardware store 2 days before the fire," she said. "It matches what was found at the scene. Combined with your security video, the timeline, and the motive, we're moving forward with charges." "About time," I said, leaning on the counter. "There's more," she added. "We pulled the financial records from the HOA's account. Turns out she reimbursed herself for that purchase using a discretionary maintenance fund." I blinked. "She used HOA money to buy lighter fluid and burn down my Coop, allegedly," Vickers said, though her expression told me she wasn't buying the allegedly part either. "She's also been using that fund to cover personal purchases. Spa visits, online shopping, even a hotel stay in Tahoe. We're filing embezzlement charges on top of arson." I let out a low whistle. "Hope she likes orange jumpsuits. She's retained a lawyer." "But with the paper trail and witness testimony, it's going to be a hard sell." I nodded slowly. "What can I do?" "Stay available. There may be a deposition, and if it goes to trial, you'll likely be called to testify." "Happy to," I said. She tried to burn down more than wood and wire. She wanted to scare people into following her rules. Vickers closed her notebook. "Not anymore." After she left, I stepped outside and looked at the Coop. The hens were pecking happily in the dust, oblivious to the legal storm swirling around their former tormentor. A few days later, the board held its first official meeting under new leadership. We gathered in the community center next to the tennis courts. I brought my own folding chair and made a point of sitting dead center, equal distance from everyone else. No head of the table, no raised platform. Just neighbors talking like equals. First order of business: freezing all discretionary funds until a full audit could be completed. Second, establishing a public notice board where all proposals and votes would be posted in advance. Third, opening nominations for new board members from outside the previous inner circle. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted. People weren't just relieved, they were hopeful, and Marla she'd officially resigned from the HOA by certified letter. The envelope had arrived that morning, postmarked from another county. No apology, no explanation, just a single sentence stating she was stepping down for personal reasons. But she wasn't getting off clean, because by then, the district attorney's office had scheduled a hearing. And I was on the witness list. I didn't want revenge. Not really. What I wanted was something better: accountability. I wanted the next petty tyrant who thought they could threaten, fine, or destroy their way into power to remember what happened here, to remember the chickens. To remember the invoice, and to remember that even a mechanic with a backyard and a hammer can turn the tide when enough neighbors stand behind him. The courthouse hallway was colder than it needed to be. Every step echoed off the polished floor tiles, bouncing between thick stone walls and heavy oak doors. I sat on a bench outside courtroom 6, hands folded, tie crooked, trying not to tug at the collar of the one button-up shirt I owned that didn't have engine grease on the cuffs. I wasn't used to this kind of place. My usual courtroom was the undercarriage of a Chevy Silverado. A bailiff passed by and nodded. I gave him a tight nod back. The door beside me opened a crack, and a woman in a gray suit stepped out. Assistant District Attorney Ramirez. She motioned me in without a word. I followed her into the courtroom and the door clicked shut behind us. Inside, it was emptier than I expected. No jury. Just the judge, Ramirez, Marla's defense attorney, and a few others scattered around the gallery. Marla sat behind the defense table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was pinned back in a severe bun, her blazer stiff at the shoulders. She didn't look at me. Ramirez led me to the witness stand and waited while I was sworn in. The judge, a tall man with a trimmed beard and a sharp gaze, nodded for Ramirez to proceed. "Mr. Nolan," she said, "can you describe what you found on the morning of May 12th? I didn't hesitate. My chicken coop was on fire. Flames were coming out the backside and the hens were trapped inside. I managed to save them, but the structure was destroyed. Did you observe anyone in the vicinity before or after the fire?" I looked directly at Marla. She was standing just beyond my yard when I got the last of the birds out. She didn't offer help. She said I'd been warned. Ramirez paced slowly in front of the jury box. "And had you received any threats or warnings from the defendant before then?" "Yes," I said. "Multiple written notices from the HOA, all signed by her. She said the coop violated new bylaws, but I'd built it before those changes were passed. The city had already cleared it." "Thank you," Ramirez said, turning toward the judge. "We'll now enter into evidence the fire marshal's report, the surveillance footage, and the financial records from the HOA account." She handed a folder to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. The judge flipped through it without comment. Marla's attorney stood. "Mr. Nolan, isn't it true that your security footage did not capture my client's face? It captured her entering through a side gate only known to HOA board members. She was wearing the same outfit I saw her in minutes later. But no video of her lighting a fire." "No," I said. "But the lighter fluid used was tracked back to a purchase made with HOA funds, and she authorized that transaction." The defense attorney adjusted his cuffs. "Couldn't someone else on the board have used the maintenance shed?" "Not unless they copied her key." "The shed log showed only one checkout that week. Her signature." Ramirez stood again. "We have additional evidence, Your Honor, the HOA's internal communications." The clerk handed over another folder. Inside were printed emails and meeting notes. Ramirez flipped to a dated page. "This is from 2 weeks before the fire. Miss Zanders wrote, 'If he won't remove the coop, we'll handle it, one way or another.'" I watched Marla shift in her chair. Her jaw clenched and she looked away. The judge exhaled, leaned back, and rubbed his temple. "We'll reconvene this afternoon. I want time to review the documents." As the courtroom emptied, I caught Marla's eye. There was no anger left there. Just a hollow sort of calculation, like she'd realized she'd been playing checkers on a chessboard and just now saw the checkmate coming. Ramirez caught up with me in the hallway. "She's going to cut a deal," she said. "We're offering reduced sentencing if she admits to the fire and the misuse of funds. She's got no leverage left." I nodded. "Can I ask for restitution?" She raised an eyebrow. "You want money, not for me," I said. "I want her to pay for the neighborhood park equipment she promised and never bought. I checked those funds went missing last year." Ramirez gave a small, approving nod. "That's doable." By the time the plea deal was finalized 2 weeks later, Marla had agreed to plead guilty to destruction of property and embezzlement. She'd serve probation, perform community service, and pay restitution to the HOA under new management, of course. But legal cleanup was only half the story. The deeper mess. That was still unfolding in the neighborhood. Turns out, Marla hadn't just been torching chicken coops and misappropriating discretionary funds. She'd buried the HOA in backdoor deals so deep that even the city's legal counsel got involved. I was in the community center when the auditors presented their findings. The new treasurer, a retired accountant named Gloria, stood beside them as they laid out a slideshow on the projector. It was worse than anyone expected. Over the past 3 years, unauthorized dues increases had been passed quietly under the guise of maintenance assessments. The legal limit on annual increases had been exceeded twice. Residents had been charged for landscaping that was never performed, repairs that were never scheduled, and security services that never existed. Gloria stepped in after the auditors finished. She redirected nearly $27,000 to a separate account listed under a fake vendor name, Zanders Property Services. It was only discovered because the bank flagged an account that hadn't moved funds in over 6 months. Gasps filled the room. An elderly couple in the back muttered something about being behind on their water bill because of those fake fees. I stood and faced the crowd. "We're going to fix this. Every resident who was overcharged will be reimbursed. We'll reverse the last 2 fee hikes. And from now on, every dollar this board spends will be posted publicly." Someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the room erupted, not with cheers but with relief. When the meeting ended, a woman I barely knew approached me. She had a baby on one hip and a tired expression. "My husband's in the hospital," she said quietly. "We've been behind on payments because of those bogus fees. Thank you for doing this." I didn't have an answer, just nodded. That night I walked my property line, flashlight in hand, checking the new fencing I'd put up around the coop. The hens were asleep, heads tucked under wings, unaware that they'd become the unlikely symbol of a broken system getting rebuilt. The next morning I met with the city's zoning office. They'd already heard about the case. The clerk handed me a folder with a smile. Inside was a proposal for a pilot program. Backyard agriculture for suburban lots, regulated but accessible. They wanted me to help draft the guidelines, public meetings, workshops, maybe even a community garden project. The city council scheduled a review for the following month. I walked out of that office with the folder under my arm and the beginnings of something bigger than chickens. Back home, I found a package on my porch. No return address. Inside was a small ceramic rooster, bright red with gold trim. A note taped to it read, "For the man who brought order to the flock." I put it on the coop's roof, next to the weather vane, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like a place where people could breathe again. Where no one was watching their yard with binoculars or measuring their grass with a ruler. Where rules were made with a vote, not a threat. And where, if someone decided to come for your chickens, they'd better be ready for a whole lot more than feathers. The city council chambers were packed tighter than a bait shop before a fishing derby. People leaned against the paneled walls, whispering over folding chairs, while others stood near the back beneath the dull hum of flickering light panels. Somewhere up front, a baby let out a squeaky yawn, followed by the soft thump of a parent rocking a stroller. I sat in the front row, a thick binder on my lap and a manila folder tucked under my arm. The city had asked me to present community input on suburban agriculture zoning. What they hadn't expected was that nearly a third of the neighborhood would show up with me, many of them still wearing their work uniforms or pushing in on break time. "Next item," announced Councilwoman Dana Reeves, tapping her pen against a stack of agendas. "Zoning reform proposal for residential backyard livestock and gardens." I stood, adjusted my cuffs, and stepped up to the podium. The microphone gave a little pop before settling. "My name is Trenton Nolan. I represent a group of homeowners from the East Brookside neighborhood," I began. "We're here to propose a pilot program that allows limited backyard agriculture chickens, raised beds, bee boxes with proper structure and oversight." Dana raised an eyebrow. "Based on your own experience?" "Yes, ma'am, and on conversations with over 70 residents. We've drafted guidelines to ensure sanitation, spacing, and neighbor consent. We've also included a clause for HOA coordination when the HOA isn't actively breaking the law." That got a few murmurs. I opened the binder and began presenting the framework. Setback allowances, maximum animal counts, composting rules, seasonal reports. The council listened, flipping through the copies I'd provided, but it wasn't until I flipped open the manila folder that the room really quieted down. "This," I said, holding up an invoice stamped and notarized, "is the restitution agreement signed by former HOA President Marla Zanders. It includes a breakdown of embezzled neighborhood funds she's been ordered to repay, including misused maintenance fees and fraudulent vendor charges. Every cent of it went to personal luxuries." Dana leaned forward. "How does this relate to urban agriculture?" "It doesn't," I said. "It relates to power, abuse of it. When one person uses a position to dictate how others live, what they grow, what they build, how they raise their families, it stops being about rules. It becomes control. And when people fight back like we did, they deserve to do so legally and transparently." The room was dead silent. A man in the corner wearing a faded post office cap started clapping, then a nurse beside him, then the whole room. Dana didn't smile, she just nodded once and tapped her pen again. "We'll move this to a vote next session," she said. "In the meantime, Mr. Nolan, I'd like to have a word with you in my office after the meeting." As the crowd exited, I followed her through a side door and into a small room lined with filing cabinets and old campaign posters. She gestured to a chair and closed the door behind us. "I'd like you to serve as a community liaison," she said without preamble. "We're forming a task force on HOA accountability and residential rights. You won't be paid much, but you'll have access to city records and a say in future zoning discussions." I blinked. "You're serious?" "I am. You've already done more to expose HOA corruption than anyone in this county in the last decade. And frankly, it's about time we had someone with dirt on their boots on the inside." I shook her hand before leaving, still trying to process it. That night, I sat on my back porch under the yellow glow of the Coop's solar lamp. The hens were asleep again, their soft rustles barely audible over the crickets. I could see the little ceramic rooster on the roof, catching moonlight like it was watching the whole street. I didn't know if I was ready for city politics, but I knew I was ready to keep fighting for my neighbors. The next morning, I was back at the community center. We'd scheduled a full audit review for the HOA books, and Gloria had managed to track down a former board member who'd resigned 6 months before things went sideways. His name was Will, and he showed up looking like a man walking into a confessional. "I didn't know she was stealing," he said, voice low. "But I saw her shred a stack of ballots once, said they were duplicates. I didn't ask questions." "Did you ever see her forge anything?" Gloria asked, flipping through a stack of meeting minutes. He hesitated. "Yeah, one time. She signed a vendor agreement for a landscaping company that doesn't exist. I checked later. No business license, no address, just a P.O. box." Gloria looked at me. "That's enough to submit to the DA's office." That afternoon, I drove back down to the courthouse with Will's statement, the forged documents, and an updated list of misappropriated funds. The DA's assistant met me at the front desk. "We've already opened a secondary case," she said, scanning the files. "This should fast-track it." By the end of the week, a second round of charges had been filed against Marla, this time for forgery, voter suppression, and fraud. The plea deal she'd taken before, nullified. She was back in court, and this time, things moved fast. I was never asked to testify again. The evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, but the paper trail was too clean, too deliberate. When the verdict came down, I wasn't even in the room. I was filling potholes with a few neighbors who'd volunteered to fix the sidewalks the HOA had ignored for years. One of the guys, a retired contractor named Mike, got the text from his daughter who worked at the courthouse. "She's getting 2 years, he said. "Probation revoked." "County jail." I kept tamping asphalt. It wasn't vengeance. It was maintenance. 3 weeks later, the park benches were installed finally, after being promised for over a year. We had enough left in the recovered funds to replace the rusted playground equipment and install motion-activated security lights. Not bad for a neighborhood that had been ruled by fear and fines just a few months before. One evening, as I was locking up the new equipment shed, a teenager walked by with a skateboard under one arm. "You the guy with the chickens?" he asked. "Depends," I said. "You with the egg thieves," he laughed. "Nah, heard you fought the HOA with a Coop and a camera." "That's pretty metal," I chuckled. "It's more paperwork than rebellion, but I'll take it." He nodded once and rolled off down the street. A few weeks later, I stood in front of the city council again. This time, the vote passed, unanimously. Backyard agriculture was now legal within city limits under clear guidelines, with opt-in clauses for HOAs and with city oversight to prevent abuse. I didn't give a speech that time. I just nodded at Dana as I left the chamber. Back home, I found a small gift on the porch, a basket of eggs. Not mine, carefully labeled with a note. "Thanks to you, we're farming now too." I placed it on the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of tea. The coop out back stood tall in the dusk, casting long shadows over the yard. The hens were quiet. The stars were just beginning to burn through the sky. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was better. And every time I looked out at that coop, I remembered what we'd built, not just the structure, but the resistance. The refusal to be bullied. The quiet power of standing your ground, with your boots in the dirt and your neighbors at your back. No one would torch our peace again. Not while we were watching.